on comparing and ordering real numbers, which is topic 8.2D. This is the last topic in our unit 1. Today, the student will know, or you will know, how to use or know keywords and phrases for ordering real numbers, understand how to compare and arrange real numbers in different forms, and be able to explain how to compare and order real numbers and solve real-world problems. Okay, so we've actually been doing this 6th and 7th grade. Now we're just moving on to the real number system, which includes those irrational numbers. So now we're comparing and ordering rational and irrational numbers. So let's get started. Okay, so again, remember when we're comparing numbers, we're going to use those inequality symbols such as greater than or less than. This is nothing new. Here again, we're looking at example number 1. Just a reminder, we read inequality symbols or statements from left to right, just like we would read a book. So here we're trying to determine 2 is either greater than or less than the square root of 8. Now, in order to compare these two values, they first need to be in the same form. Right now we have a whole number and we have a square root. So we're going to need to convert and decide what form we want these numbers to be in order for us to be able to compare them. So you're going to need your calculator, and most likely we're going to want to change these forms, these numbers to decimal form, just to make it easier for us to compare. So go ahead and grab your calculator. I'm going to grab my calculator, and I'm just going to clear. Okay, so 2 is already a whole number. That's already a decimal. Again, if you don't remember, the decimal is here at the end, but I'm just going to write it here. Okay, and then we just need to change the square root of 8 to a decimal. So again, we can use our calculator, the square root of 8, and we get 2 8/10. And again, that's just an approximation, guys. Okay, now if you notice, the way I lined my decimals up makes it very easy for me to compare just by looking at place values. So if I look at the ones place, 2 and 2, I can't really compare anything there because they're the same. So then I just move to the next place value, which happens to be the 10ths place. Here I can see that 0 is less than 8. So 2 is less than the square root of 8. And then I just put my inequality symbol. And again, we read from left to right. 2 is less than the square root of 8. Okay, example number 2, we're going to do the same thing. Negative 1 5/10 is already in decimal form. Negative 5/2. Again, fractions are just division, guys. So when we put this in our calculator, you can just put negative 5 divided by 2. And I'm going to get negative 2.5. And again, I'm still lining my decimals up to make it easy for me to compare. One thing, though, that I do want to remind you of, and this is important for example number 2. If you notice, both of them are negative. So now we're looking at the opposite side of 0. And just as a quick reference, if we're looking here, this is the negative side of the number line. Okay, if I plot these numbers, negative 1.5, which is here, negative 2.5, which would be here. Now, remember though, these are negatives. So as we're moving further and further from 0, we're getting smaller and smaller. Okay, so in reality, even though negative 2.5 might look larger, it's smaller than negative 1.5 because it is further away from 0. So here, negative 1.5, since it's closer to 0, is greater than negative 5/2. So just keep that in mind when you're working with those smaller numbers. With those negative numbers. Okay, example number 3, 12.5 and the square root of 145. Again, 12.5 is already in decimal form. I'm going to put this up here where I have space. Okay, and the square root of 45, come over to my calculator, put that in. 12 0/10, since we're approximating, and since 12.5 only goes to the 10ths place, we just need to write that to the 10ths place. Okay, and just know that that's an approximation, guys. It's not the exact answer. So again, when we're comparing, we're looking at the 10s place, everything is the same. We look at the ones place, 2 and 2, everything is the same. So when we get to this tenths place, we have 5 and we have 0. 5 is larger than 0, so 12.5 is larger than the square root of 145. So when we put that in our statement, 12.5 is greater than the square root of 145. Okay, so again, remember guys, keep your calculators handy. Make sure that your numbers are in the same form before you decide to compare. And if they're negative, be very careful with those. Again, remember, the further you are from 0, the smaller you are. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so let me get this out of the way. So when we're ordering, it's important. We talked about comparing first, because when we're ordering, we need to know which number is bigger and which number is smaller by comparing. Because if we want to order them, and again, normally we order from least to greatest or greatest to least, we need to know which one is bigger or smaller. Now, since we're in 8th grade, we're going to bump up our vocabulary. The word problem might not say put these in order from least to greatest. They might say put this list of numbers in ascending order or increasing order. So y'all need to know that least to greatest is, you might see it as ascending or increasing. Those mean the same thing. Again, it might not say greatest to least. It might say put these values in descending order or decreasing order. Okay, so we need to know that those are associated with greatest to least. Okay, so we're going to work through an example of each to make sure that you get a full understanding. All right, so example number 1, it says list the following in increasing order. Okay, so I put this little poster over here, guys, ascending and increasing. Okay, if you notice, the little girl is at the bottom of the stairs and she's moving upwards. Okay, and it says ascending is when numbers are arranged from smallest to least, or to largest, or again, least to greatest. So here we want increasing, so we're starting with small numbers and we're working our way to the larger numbers. Also, if you notice, the numbers that they give us are not in the same form. We have percentages, we have fractions, we have decimals. So you need to decide what form you want these numbers in order to actually compare them. And again, decimal form is the easiest, especially since we're using calculators. So here, take a minute to go ahead and get your calculator again. Okay, so here I have 65 hundredths, which is already in decimal form. So I'm just going to write that to the side. I need to take 6 5/10% and write that as a decimal. Okay, now guys, remember, this is a percentage. Even though it has a decimal, it's not in true decimal form yet. It's still in this percentage. But we know that percents are out of 100. So when we put that in our calculator, we can say 6.5 divided by 100, and we get 65 thousandths. So that is in true decimal form. So we're going to put that here. And again, this is representing 6 5/10%. Okay, and again, if you notice, I'm taking my time to line up my decimals so that I can clearly see which ones are greater, which ones are smaller. So when I'm putting them in order, it makes it a little easier. 2/3, again, come to your calculator. Fractions are just division problems. 2 divided by 3. And we get this repeating decimal, which is 6. And we're going to just keep repeating that 6. Okay? And 1/2, we know as a decimal should be pretty simple. 5/10, but if you need to, you can put it in your calculator. It would be 1 divided by 2. Okay, so now that all my numbers are in decimal form, now I can easily see and compare them. And again, we said increasing is from least to greatest. Okay, so I'm going to start with the smallest number first. And if we look here, when we find where they have all the same place value, which is the tenths place, we have 6, 0, 6, and 5. Clearly, we know that 0 is the smallest out of those 4. So this number right here, 65, 6 5/10%, is going to be first in our order. Okay, Then, so we can cross this one out here, put a check mark here. Next, we have 6, still looking at that 10th place, 6, 6, and 5. Obviously, we know that 5 is smaller than 6, so 1.5 is going to be second. Mark that out. Okay. Our next one, we have 6 and we have 6. So when we have the same number and the same place value, we're just going to keep moving place values. So now we're going to look at the hundredths place. We have 5 and we have 6. Okay. We know that 5 is smaller than 6. So that's going to be our next. So 65 hundredths. And then which leaves us with 2/3 as our largest number. Okay, so again, increasing means from least to greatest. You could also see ascending. Again, those are terms that we need to know, guys. Okay, especially when we're dealing with word problems. All right, so let's look at another example. Okay, so let me get my calculator out of the way so you can see. Okay, so here the example says list the following in descending order. And if you notice, the poster over here is the opposite of what we were just doing. Descending order is when numbers are arranged from largest to smallest or greatest to least. If you notice, the little kid with the backpack is now going down the stairs. He's starting out with large numbers and slowly getting smaller and smaller. Again, we can also know that as decreasing. Okay, so descending, decreasing. Just kind of sound the same, look similar, but again, those are associated with going from greatest to least. So here again, I got all types of numbers, square roots, pi, decimals. So in order to even compare them and put them in order, we first need to change their form. And again, decimal is just the easiest. So again, grab that calculator and we're going to change these to decimals. So first we're going to start off with the square root of 121. This one you should know, you shouldn't have to put it in your calculator. This is an example of a perfect square. But again, double check, put it in your calculator. The square root of 121 should be 11 because that's that perfect square. Perfect. So here, the square root of 121 is equal to 11. And I'm going to add the decimal and the 0 just because I know that these other forms are going to have decimals. So that way I can easily just line them up. Pi squared. All right, so to get pi, we hit second and the little caret top, pi. To square it, we just hit the square button and we hit enter. And we get 9 and 8/10. So again, just keeping my decimals lined up so that makes it easier for me at the end. 11 and 1/10 is already in decimal form. So again, I'm just going to keep with my decimal being lined up. And then the square root of 30, the last one, I'm going to just put it in my calculator. The square root of 130, which gives me 11 and 4/10. Okay, now remember, now that we have them in decimal form, we need to go back and make sure we're putting them in the correct order. And again, descending order is what we're focusing on, which again means from greatest to least. So we're starting with the biggest number and then getting to the smallest number. So what I notice is that my smallest number, just by looking at these, is 9 and 8/10. And so I know that since that's my smallest number, it's going to go here at the end. Oh, actually, I want to represent that using the number, the original form. So the original form was pi squared. Okay. Now, so I can go ahead and mark through this one. Okay, put a check mark here to make sure I used it. Now, let's look at our place values. If we look, we have 11, 11, and 11. Again, nothing is different here. So then we move to the 10th place, 0, 1, and 4. And now we can clearly see there's a difference. Again, we're going from greatest to least. So if I'm looking at 0, 1, and 4, 4 is the largest. So I know that the square root of 130 is going to be at the beginning of my order. Okay, so I can mark through that. Check mark there. The next largest out of 0 and 1 is 1. So that's 11 and 1/10. Mark through that one. And the only one I have left is the square root of 121. So now my numbers, or my real numbers, are in order from greatest to least, or they are in descending order, meaning they're starting large and they're getting smaller. All right, guys. So tomorrow we're going to focus on actually applying these to real world problems. Today we're just focusing on using those inequalities, getting familiar again, and practicing on our vocabulary with greatest to least and least to greatest. So hopefully I can see you at one of the office hours today, but make sure that you're completing those assignments. And again, if you have any questions, contact me, but hope to see you at the office hours at 9:30 and 2. And I hope you have a great day.